What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. Hope all is well wherever you are. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and that you've taken some time to marinate, to stew on, to kind of just sit back and reflect on the 2022 NFL Draft and how our Dallas Cowboys fared throughout it. I know that the draft grades from a lot of people, including a lot of BTBers, have not exactly been kind to the Cowboys. And, a point that I've made in the process of evaluating what the Cowboys did throughout the draft was that my measurement of it all is the totality of how we got here. Looking at the offseason as a whole, I think in a vacuum, the Dallas Cowboys draft class is certainly ripe with a lot of potential, but a lot of what those players are going to be asked to do this year obviously hinges upon what the Cowboys did, or rather didn't do, throughout the offseason. And so this video, this discussion right now is kind of encapsulating every single move that the Dallas Cowboys did or did not make, and kind of a 101 on how we got here. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the Dallas Cowboys did throughout free agency. You can see all of the players that the Dallas Cowboys brought back. It's obviously a very large list. You can see the new players that have been added. I realize the list is not too long. And then you can see the players lost. Just running through this thing here from top to bottom. Players brought back. Dalton Schultz, of course, got the franchise tag. Michael Gallup got the big contract, 5 years, $62.5 million deal. Other than that, though, it was all pretty chalk. It was all pretty standard. It was kind of classic Cowboys, vintage Stephen Jones operations. 1 year deal for Jeremy Sprinkle. In fact, 1 year deals for Noah Brown, Jake McQuaid, the long snapper that John Fossil loves, Leighton Vander Esch, we'll get to him in a second, Luke Gifford, and Carlos Watkins. Multi-year deals for a few different players. Malik Hooker, who we were excited to see return to the team. Dorrance Armstrong, of course, that became far more important when Randy Gregory left. J-Ron Curtis, that was a big win for the Cowboys. Big kudos to them there. And then Brian Anger, the punter, who they brought in last year, who was a Pro Bowler and fantastic. And that's awesome. I mean, you can make an argument about not paying a punter big-time money, but, it's a punter. Whatever. We're not going to, sit here and really dissect the nature of the punting position. The Leighton Vander Esch thing is a point that I've brought up several different times, just because his deal's about $3 million this season. Had the Cowboys picked up his fifth-year option a year ago, obviously heading into his fourth year, the final year of a standard rookie contract, then he would have been on the books this year for a little bit over $9 million. Instead, the Cowboys declined it. Leighton was a fine player. Obviously, Micah's ascension to superstardom obviously overshadowed what he was doing a little bit, but Leighton did stay healthy, and that was kind of the knock on him for a very long time. And so he comes back on a 1 year, $3 million deal. And I've heard people say, well, the Cowboys played this thing right. They've got Leighton on the books for less. And that's true, but had they played this thing right, then he'd be an all-star player on his fifth-year option, and they'd already be talking about locking him up to a long-term extension. And so it's unfortunate, but you did need that depth. And so the Cowboys took care of that. Great. New players added. Wide receiver James Washington, he was actually the first external free agent that the Cowboys signed, coming over from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Dante Fowler, a.k.a. the other guy, in the words of Jerry Jones, who we hope is doing well. Coming over from the Atlanta Falcons, obviously the connection with Dan Quinn is what made him make sense for Dallas for a very long time. And Ryan Nall, who really came up out of nowhere, joining the team. You can never have enough running backs, I suppose, but obviously kind of a camp body. We'll see, if he ultimately winds up contributing to the team in a serious capacity. We saw Ito Smith and, other running backs have their moments last year, but this backfield obviously belongs to Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. And players lost. This is important because this encapsulates the entire Dallas Cowboys offseason, and these are significant players. In other words, important names. We don't have every single name on here, but Amari Cooper was traded to the Cleveland Browns. That trade, unfortunately, I know people are sick of talking about this, but the value that the Cowboys got back continues to look worse and worse and worse, is exemplified by the two Brown trades that happened in the first round of the NFL draft. AJ going to the Philadelphia Eagles and Marquise going to the Arizona Cardinals. The Cowboys far and away got the worst possible value for a legitimate wide receiver that was traded away this offseason. You can obviously argue that Amari's not in the same company as Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill. He's definitely, in the same company as A.J. Brown. Not that he's better or worse, but he's in that kind of neck of the woods in Hollywood Brown, and he's certainly better than Devontae Parker, who also went, etc. But that, was a tough pill to swallow for this franchise. Both Cedric Wilson and Connor Williams wound up with the Miami Dolphins. In fact, it was their departures that kind of, set the Cowboys up for two of their first three draft picks. Randy Gregory, we mentioned, of course, heading to the Denver Broncos. That was a very controversial sort of thing. Lyle Collins, that's the only player on this list besides Greg Zuerlein, we're talking like legitimate contributors here, who the Dallas Cowboys cut. Everything else was just sort of an expiration of a contract. But Greg Zuerlein's gone as well, and DeMonte Kazee very recently wound up with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Keanu Neal, you'll note that we have him listed as a safety / linebacker now for the Buccaneers. He played linebacker for the Cowboys, but he is reverting back to that safety position. It sure would be funny, wouldn't it, if he was an awesome safety for the Buccaneers. But okay, so that kind of set the stage, and I don't think it's unfair. I don't think you would disagree. I don't think even the most homerific Dallas Cowboys fan would disagree that after all of those moves, the Dallas Cowboys roster was worse, right? The roster that lost to the San Francisco 49ers, the roster that was not enough, etc., however else you want to put it. It was not enough. They had to nail the draft. That was the most important thing, right? Stephen Jones loves to say, they all love to talk about how they build through the draft. Okay, Cowboys, we didn't think that was necessarily possible in all likelihood, especially as far back as you were picking, only having 3 top 100 picks. But what did the Dallas Cowboys do? Again, the 2022 NFL draft came to a conclusion last weekend. Here are all 9 players who the Dallas Cowboys drafted. Of course, the group headlined by Tyler Smith, listed as tackle, but probably going to play guard for the Cowboys, obviously, here in 2022, before eventually seemingly replacing Tyron Smith out on the left side. D. Williams, the pass rusher out of Ole Miss. If you're confused about that still, maybe you're wondering why it's not listed as Sam. We had D on our live draft show on Saturday last week. He specifically asked Dallas Cowboys fans to call him D and not Sam. It's part of his middle name, DeGarrick, and so that's what he wants. So D. Williams it is. Jalen Tolbert from South Alabama. I think that's everybody's favorite pick. It's going to be awesome. That's your Cedric Wilson replacement. No disrespect, of course, intended for Cedric, who really just kind of had, showed up to Miami and then the whole party started. Then they started getting wide receivers left and right. So that sucked. Jake Ferguson, maybe your long-term tight end replacement. If you don't get a deal worked out with Dalton Schultz, okay. Matt Waletzko, hopefully a tackle project of the future, but that's what we said about Josh Ball from a football standpoint a year ago, and obviously that hasn't materialized quite yet. Deron Bland, incredible athlete as well. We'll see, although extremely unlikely he contributes to the Cowboys this season. Even more so is the case for Damone Clark, the linebacker out of LSU, fantastic player, wore number 18 for the Tigers. All everything you could possibly want as far as decorating his collegiate career, but had this spinal fusion surgery, and very, very unlikely going to play this year, but hey, we're willing to accept that that's a bit of a lottery ticket for the future. John Ridgway, we're all pumped about that. Really comes and gives you this solid piece in the middle of your defensive line. You will note that we actually, if I go back to the free agency list here, we do not have Brent Urban on the players lost, or rather in the players lost group, because he's not on a new team. We've only updated that when players have found new teams, and he obviously hasn't been brought back. So Brent Urban, technically a free agent, and it does kind of feel like John Ridgway is the Cowboys' answer for him, although we're rooting for Brent Urban. He was awesome for the Cowboys last year. And Devin Harper last year out of Oklahoma. I know that I'm taking up that word, but hey, so what? Sorry. When I look at this, if I go back and forth between these two graphics, if I look at this and I say, okay, Cowboys, you had 9 picks to work with. You had 9 picks to fix this. And I don't mean to say, because I know this subject has been talked about a lot, but I don't mean to say the Dallas Cowboys had the worst possible offseason imaginable. They're a disaster. Their front office is stupid and terrible and gross and blah, blah, blah. But it was not good, right? Like there are a lot of decisions here that we can question, right? There are a lot of decisions here that we can argue were unwise. But okay, Cowboys, if the names on this list had been, a la the Baltimore Ravens, a la the New York Jets, a la the New York Giants, a la the Philadelphia Eagles, then we would feel better about this. But going from this to this is a little bit of a disappointment, and I think that's why a lot of people have graded it the way that they have. This is not a group that can come in and adequately replace what has happened throughout all the free agency, and that's the problem with the Cowboys, right? Is we look at them and we say, okay, cool, and let's get our draft picks back up here. The top 3, and the Cowboys draft board leaked again because it's the Dallas Cowboys and that's how they like to operate, whatever. But your top 3 picks, you're expected to contribute in some way, shape, or form to a legitimate degree here throughout their rookie season, right? Tyler Smith is your Connor Williams replacement. D. Williams, in loose terms, is your Randy Gregory replacement, and Jalen Tolbert is effectively not only your Cedric Wilson replacement, but your Amari Cooper replacement. Now, you can argue that your Amari Cooper replacement is actually CeeDee Lamb, and so your wide receivers kind of climb up the hierarchy. So maybe you look at it that way. But the point is, Jalen Tolbert is now a significant part of how you're operating when you're in 11 personnel, and that's what we want to see. That's how the Cowboys obviously flourish and play their best football. And so Jalen Tolbert factors into that equation in a very large sense. That being said, Tyler Smith is not Connor Williams. I know that you are probably somebody who hates on Connor Williams. I'm not going to sit here and and tell you he's awesome, but he is definitely somebody who I think a lot of Dallas Cowboys fans were paying some serious disrespect to throughout the course of the end of last season. I know he sort of deserved it, if you want to argue that, had all the penalties, et cetera, but we are going to miss that football player. And Tyler Smith, it is a tall task to come in and contribute right away, especially when you factor in that Tyron Smith, who is playing on, obviously, Tyler's left side, is probably going to miss some time this season. It's a difficult, kind of puzzle to put together. D. Williams is not going to have the same impact that Randy Gregory did last year, although a solid argument could be made that Randy Gregory might not have had the impact that Randy Gregory had last year. Randy was awesome a year ago, and we all wish he had returned to the Cowboys, and we're all wishing him the best of luck in Denver. But what he did last year was very special, and it's unlikely that you're going to find that star pass rusher opposite of DeMarcus Lawrence unless you've got Micah Parsons lining up there on a consistent basis. Jalen Tolbert, it is easier for rookies, obviously, to contribute at the wide receiver position, but you're going to miss Amari Cooper. And so I think when you look at just those positions, right, like this is just 3 spots that we are talking about here, and just talking about the roster, the Cowboys have taken steps backwards, right? They've taken a step backwards at left guard, at defensive end, right defensive end specifically. They've taken a step back at wide receiver 3, however you want to define that. They've taken a step back as far as likelihood, right? Like if as far as probability is concerned. I know that, look, we're all going to sit here and we're all going to argue Dan Quinn is back, and that was a big get for the Cowboys to return Dan Quinn to lead their defense. That's awesome. Kudos. Good job, guys. But defensive success in the NFL is one of the hardest things to stick. And maybe you believe in Dan Quinn. I certainly do, and I think you do. Maybe you believe in Micah Parsons. I certainly do. I know you do. Maybe you believe in Trayvon Diggs. I certainly do. I know you do. But the likelihood of the Dallas Cowboys defense having the same level of success to the point that it could carry the team, because that's what it did over the latter course of the season, certainly throughout December and the early parts of January, it's unlikely that those results are going to repeat themselves. That's just the way defensive success traditionally goes in the NFL. I mean, think about any dominant defense as of late. They do not stick year to year. There was that 2018 Chicago Bears defense that got them to the playoffs, the double doink year, and that fell apart the following year in 2019. Look at a year ago at this time, there were so many people who foolishly were saying that the at the time, the football team, the Washington football team, that they're going to repeat because this defense is awesome. And you'll recall, they had signed Ryan Fitzpatrick to be their quarterback. Obviously that didn't work out. But the discussion and the argument for that team to win the division was all Ryan Fitzpatrick has to do is manage the offense, and the defense is going to do enough. Now Fitzpatrick got hurt, and that's a separate situation, but the defense fell apart. The Washington football team defense last year was not just middle of the road. It regressed even harder than usual defenses regress. It regressed to becoming one of the worst defenses in the NFL for a little bit of a stretch before they kind of found their footing late in the season. And so it's very likely that the Cowboys defense, who was one of the very, very, very best defenses in the NFL last year, especially from a standpoint of how many turnovers they generated, it's very likely that those sorts of data points regress to the mean. It's extremely unlikely that Micah Parsons is going to have as many sacks again in 2022. It's extremely unlikely. I would argue even more unlikely that Trayvon Diggs is going to have as many interceptions in 2022 as he did in 2021. Imagine if he'd had that, by the way, in a contract year. It would have been, or not a contract year, but imagine if he'd been eligible for an extension right now. It'd be crazy for Stephen Jones and the rest of the front office. But so my point is, all those things are likely going to regress, right? Just based on tons and tons and tons of historical data. Okay, so you've already got that working against you. Then you've got the fact that you're weaker at these important positions like left guard, defensive end, and wide receiver 3. Yes, the Cowboys do have a group of undrafted free agents. Let's get this list up for you. There are 20 names on this list. I don't know anybody here. Again, I realize this is the Cowboys, the team who found Tony Romo and Miles Austin and Lucky Whitehead and Dan Bailey and current right tackle Terrence Steele, who I know I forgot when we did the undrafted free agent video. A lot of you reminded me. Luke Gifford and Francis Bernard. The Cowboys have a great tradition of finding undrafted free agents, but it is extremely unlikely that they are going to find someone on this list right here that you're looking at that is going to be a significant contributor to their success here in 2022. The person on this list with the largest likelihood of that happening is Jonathan Garibay, the name right there in the middle. Why? Because he's a kicker. Why is that the case? Because the Cowboys do not currently have a kicker on their roster, so it makes a lot of sense that he would ultimately wind up being the one that makes it, and therefore, obviously, by being a kicker would have some level of high impact on the team. So I think when you look at the offseason as a whole, when you look at what the Cowboys did and didn't do in free agency, when you look at what they ultimately then did in the draft, when you look at undrafted free agency, which is a part of the team building process. I mean, right now, where we're at, the Cowboys, I believe right now, and I'm recording this on Friday, May 6th at 4 p.m. Central Time, they are right above the 90-man roster limit. I think they're actually at 91 players on their roster after having waived Shewo Olenilua earlier this week. So this is kind of it. Like, this is the group that we're effectively going to training camp with, right? Like, this is the team. These are basically the players who the 2022 Dallas Cowboys are going to be mined out of. Obviously, a lot of players are going to get cut and things like that, but this is it. And, you know, again, not to sit here and say the Cowboys are terrible, they're an awful front office, blah, 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 but it's hard to argue that they did not take serious steps backwards. And some of that is natural. Some of that is you're going to lose good players. When you're a good team, you know, when players perform well in contract years, they're going to leave. That's just the way life goes, and especially businesses like these. And if you're the Dallas Cowboys and you have bigger stages, look at Cedric Wilson. Good for him capitalizing on that. I mean, that is going to happen. But some of these things, and we'll put this up here one more time, because these are the important things, right? Like these are, and I would argue the most important group of data around here that we put up. If we look at this graphic and we look at this graphic and we look at this graphic, the most important, you know, sort of set of data is that players lost column, because it features Amari Cooper, Randy Gregory, and Connor Williams. Now you could argue here, obviously, the, you know, introduction of Tyler Smith to the offense and D. Williams and Jalen Tolbert are equally important. In fact, you can make an argument that they're more important because they have to replace those other players. So there's a lot of success that you've heard me throughout the course of this video say the word unlikely several times, right? Like, it's unlikely these things repeat. It's unlikely these things happen again. It's unlikely, it's unlikely, it's unlikely. And I think that that's ultimately what this offseason has been about for the Cowboys. All of the things that they're trying to do are possible, right? They exist in the realm of possibilities. But they are such long likelihoods. They are so unlikely that, yes, it could happen. You could, you know, I've used the analogy before this offseason. The Cowboys, I'm going to amend the analogy. If you have ever seen, I know a lot of you watch these videos, but now I'm talking to you one-on-one. If you have ever seen the season 1 finale of How I Met Your Mother, great show before the end. This is a show, it's a sitcom. This guy's, you know, trying to make this girl fall in love with him. She's about to go on a trip for the weekend with other people. He doesn't want her to fall in love with somebody else, so he does not want her to go on the trip. The only way he can get her to not go on the trip is if it rains. And so throughout the episode, he's learning how to do a rain dance, and he's on the roof of his building doing this, you know, rain dance, whatever. And all of his other friends are like, "This is stupid. This is never going to work. Just give it up, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "No, this is going to work. I'm going to try. I'm going to make this work." He's committed. I'm absolutely going to make this rain dance happen so that everything else that I'm trying to will into existence can ultimately happen as well. And as fate would have it, because it's a television show, he makes it rain. And he goes, he, you know, finds the girl, they fall in love, et cetera, et cetera. The show, just don't watch it after that. Just watch season 1, then you'll be happy. That's kind of how I view the Cowboys, right? Like, and the Cowboys last year, they did it, right? The Cowboys, you know, just like season 1 finale of How I Met Your Mother, they made it rain last year. Awesome. Respect, Cowboys. Good job. We're proud of you. But as unlikely and impossible as it was, the Cowboys have gone to the same rooftop, to the same place, we're in the same clothes, doing the same dance on a bright sunny day. And they're saying, we can make it rain because we've done it before. And you have. You have done it before. You pulled off some impossible stuff last year. You really, really shocked the world with Micah Parsons. You knew something. You pulled it off. Dan Quinn, et cetera, et cetera. Congratulations. But it cannot happen again just because you wanted to. And so I think when you assess the entire offseason, they're banking on the ability to make it rain. And that is not the wisest bet to make. But now that I've rambled on about How I Met Your Mother for a couple of minutes, that means it's time to kind of wrap this thing up. So that's my assessment of the offseason as a whole for the Cowboys. Now that, you know, the draft has had some time to kind of sit and chill and sort of crust over, like when you pull lasagna out the oven. So what do you think? I would be anxious to hear your thoughts. You can hit me up on Twitter or Instagram at RJ Ochoa. That is, of course, my name. You know me all throughout the Blog on the Boys universe. Here on our YouTube channel, please do subscribe. Our podcast network. I'm also now on TikTok. TikTok. That's right. RJ.Ochoa if you want to see me talking around. Yeah, so that about does it. I hope you have the greatest weekend of all time. I hope you have the best weekend ever. I seriously hope whatever you got to get done, whether it's yard work, you got to go run an errand, you got to go out of town, you got a trip, you got a vacation, you're just going to sit and watch Netflix, watch the final season of Ozark. I haven't seen it, so sorry about that. Whatever it is, I hope that it is the time of your life. I hope you have the greatest weekend of all time. I hope you have the greatest weekend ever. You know why? Simple. Because you deserve it. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. See you next time.